Welcome to the Humble Hoof podcast. My name is Alicia Harlov. This is a podcast for both horse owners and hoof care professionals, offering discussions into various philosophies on the health of the hoof and soundness of your horse. Please check us out on Facebook or at thehumblehoof.com. A few years ago, I had a fantastic conversation with 3 UK-based farriers, and one of those was Matthew Jackson from Scotland. We talked about their journeys from fully qualified farriers to a more barefoot and no steel hoof care approach. And it was such a fantastic conversation, I actually had them on the podcast again. Well, I reached back out to these guys and ended up chatting with Matthew Jackson about what it can mean when it seems like barefoot just isn't working. This is that conversation, and stay tuned for the next episode when Matthew Jackson and I are joined by Mark Johnson and Robbie Richardson to chat again all together. Well, thank you so much for being willing to hop on the podcast again. And I know that you've done this before, and hopefully people have heard the amazing conversations we've had in the past. But if you could just do a little refresher for people who maybe are tuning in for the first time of a little bit about your background and how you kind of became involved in hoof care and, where that led you to now.
Hoof care? Oh, really interesting. Where do I start? I think it was about 12 or 13. My mum wanted to have a horse. We moved up the west coast of Scotland, and it was one of those family votes, and I was the only one that said no, because once the novelty wore off, somebody would have to look after it. And needless to say, that kind of happened, and it ended up being me. But what was lovely, there was a really old guy that used to come and shoe her, a man called George White. He's not with her anymore. But we just, like every farriers, you just have a period of time of just chewing the fat. And the age I was at, you were going through school and a lot of stuff didn't make sense and you were struggling and stuff. And it was him, the poor guy, he took about 3 or 4 hours to shoe my mum's horse. Like when I say he was old, he was old. And I ended up, at the age of 13, you were taking the shoes off for him, you know what I mean? Other than shaping them up, even at one point, you had me nailing the shoes on, So it was lovely because it was very spontaneous. It wasn't, this is what I want to do. And the reality wasn't enjoying school. And he just suggested, well, why don't you do this? So I wrote to 2 farriers. One of them wrote back. And over a period of a summer, when I was 15, every week I phoned him. Every week. And eventually his father phoned back and saying, look, you can come over, you can come and hang out, see what you want to do. But he says, just stop phoning. So I went over and just had a great time and ended up doing a 7-year apprenticeship. I was too young really to go to college, which was a great thing for these guys to do, kind of take you under the wing and just kind of see where you are at, really. So what age was that? I was 16.
Wow.
So I did 2 years running around learning the ropes. And by the time I got to college, I had my own shoeing round. So that was really interesting because the area I worked in, which was the North Highlands, you had every different type of horse. You had, 100,000-pound eventers, show jumpers, and then you were doing little ponies, trekking ponies, Clydesdales, you name it, working Clydesdales as well. So it was, you were seeing everything, but more importantly, the landscape in which you worked in was very, very much so. It was so diverse. And, when I was younger and stuff, I was always asking my boss this, that, and the other. And I can always remember him one day, we're busy driving along the road, and he says, look, I can't answer that question. You're going to end up being one of them bloody trimmers, was what he said. And I had no idea what he meant. So when I qualified, moved down to Northumberland and worked with 2 different farriers and things, and then started a way up by myself. But my apprenticeship was heavily, heavily influenced by a chap called Mac Head, who was the chap that set up the factories that was making the original Natural Balance shoes. So that kind of ethos used to come up and used to hang out with my boss. So you were in these circles of, it was all about performance. It was all about getting the maximum from the bottom up for the horse. And at that time, you were immersed in it, but you don't really fully understand it. when I went to Northumberland, it was lovely, great, fantastic people. But what started happening was there was a massive shift within the equine world where you had an awful lot of horses where they started not getting roughed off. So every horse had a specific job and they had a period of rest, and this started not happening. Now, up Scotland and things, horses shod four sets a year, if that, 5 sets, and then they had time off and things. So you're exposed to good feet, but you were exposed to feet that maybe were struggling in the environments that they were at. What was interesting when I went to college, I always questioned the health of the feet of the horses that we were working on and things. One of the instructors saying, well, all the horses' feet are like this around here. And myself looking back now, I mean, they were flat prolapsed laminatic feet. You know, these horses were really struggling. So you had little pockets of influence all the time. What I started finding was got a reputation being able to keep shoes on, that kind of stuff. But I started to worry, started to really, really, really start to struggle where you were planning 2 sets of shoes ahead for nail holes, that kind of thing, because you are running out of material. Because these guys were just shod all year round with the different competitions and things that were on. And it was a client. A client were really struggling to shoe the horse, and she's going, well, you know, what about taking the shoes off? So, okay, let's do that. That was great. And at that point, there was things like Hilda Strasser books. So I had clients giving me these books for to read and things. And it was just this explosion of unanswered questions that you were observing within your daily practice, but you didn't really have protocols for. So a lot of the traditional stuff you were taught was like, well, this isn't actually helping us here in the field. So at the time, to have very conscientious owners that I worked for that were part of that journey of learning was, I mean, it was a phenomenal time. You know, it was the explosion of the internet, forums, and there was this freedom and this movement of ideals around hoof care. And to be quite honest, I just embraced it. You know, anything to make my job easy. It was, yeah, let's get on and get it done. You know, the barefoot side was interesting. I was starting to get not like a reputation, but there was, but you were getting exposed more and more to people that were wanting to have the shoes off the horse to see if they could go without shoes and things. And then eventually I was, again, it was a client. She goes, oh, there's this guy, Pete Raymond, he's coming to the UK. I think you should probably go and hang out with him. And it was just the most amazing 2 days of my career, because how he presents things is in a way that he's wanting you to explore and learn with him.
Yeah.
Rather than preachy, this is what you must do. So you have just been given information. And I mean, for me at the time, the biggest revelation, dare I say it, was the digital cushion. It just like everything started to make sense, because what I was starting to do through my shoeing and things was I was starting to leapfrogs, because I wanted the back of the foot to have some sort of support rather than, you know, excessively trim it and make it look all pretty. But then you're going, Jesus, great big huge gap here. You know what I mean? There is no central loading here, you know. So very much just started like one limb shoeing because the horse was uncomfortable, but then you were using overgrown frog for to create that stability that when you applied the shoe, the foot was kind of getting lost. So it was lots and lots of things that were happening at the time. When I got back, it was lovely. So I'd asked bunch of clients for come. We had a meeting in a village hall. That was immense, because I thought maybe 10 would turn up. I mean, there was over 60. And at that time, I was saying, right, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to start measuring feet. We're going to start trying to understand some of these challenges that everybody universally seems to be happening. And I mean, these guys were brilliant. They were so up for it. Set up a little revision group, which was fantastic. So we used to meet once a month, and we all used to sort of give ourselves a couple of things for to sort of read up about, and it just kind of exploded from there. So and then dare I say, UK NHCP was formed. I was invited over to hang out with a bunch of guys. That was where I kind of met Mark, my lifetime friend, and it was and it all exploded from that. And cut a long story short, because you were going down this rabbit hole of, right, okay, for me, it was about, right, let's get better feet, let's get better performance out of these horses. It was never about, let's have them just get by. It was about, can we get more out of them, out of a shoe? Can we get more performance out of them? And you just became a magnet for people that were wanting to try this. It took me about, I'm trying to think, it was about 2-3 years, and the whole of my shoeing round, I managed to get them unshod. So that was, so I'm quite proud of that, but more so I'm really, really proud of the people I worked for, because it was them that did that. I understand the Barefoot is not just taking shoes off, it's a lifestyle of, working around the center of the horse for the horse's needs, and sort of gauging their health based around, how well they were doing. And if they weren't doing so well, we were able to, get in there an awful lot more quicker than what you maybe would traditionally with shoes and things. So it was, it was great stuff. It was, it was really good. And just, again, you were exposed, and I think this was what was really important. You're exposed to some of the, the great names of equine research, Robert Bowker, Chris Pollitt, met these guys, Gene Ovanik, and, there was a chap, we went to America. It was quite kind of interesting. And I met the most amazing farrier from Tennessee, a guy called Charles Hall. And it was interesting, we're there specifically to look at laminatics and things like that. And again, he just turned around and he goes, well, where I live, they're all sick because it's an industrial area. The ground's sick. It's like, oh my gosh, right, okay. And that, that started you thinking about soil and where they were living and all that kind of stuff. And before I knew it, I had a core group of professional people that if we start on a horse for the first time, you were going in with a package, shall we say, of lots of expertise to try and allow these horses to sort of rehab as quickly as possible. I had clients that ended up building track systems that I ended up using for rehabbing horses and stuff. It was just an explosion of a different way of doing things, and I'd love to say, oh, I did this and I did that. It wasn't like that. You were part of a movement of people that were trying to do things better, and it was a huge privilege to be part of it, so
yeah,
that's a lot.
No, that's great. And it's amazing to hear that, because it's so interesting, because I feel like, I came in way later in the game, and Pete Ramey was one of the people that I also, that kind of pushed me into the barefoot side of things. And I wasn't in hoof care at all before my horse was having issues, and I came at it from the barefoot side because that's what I had, spent time Googling, researching, and reading about. And it's interesting, sort of the opposite, where I went in and was like, oh my goodness, like I'm going to fix all these horses with barefoot and everyone's going to be sound, and everybody who's put a shoe on a horse is wrong. And it's just, I had this polar opposite view. And then the more I've been in the hoof care world, the more I've really appreciated the amazing farriers that I've shadowed. And now it's like, I just want to learn from anybody who cares about the horse and is wanting to really think about the ethics of what they're doing and the health of the hoof and the health of the whole horse. And also just, having my own rehab facility now and getting in cases where, I think sometimes it's owners send me horses that nobody has been able to really figure out, thinking that maybe something so outside the box will help. And sometimes those are the ones that, I put them here and they're living on a track system and they're on tested hay and they have this perfect diet and perfect environment. And I'm still seeing horses, like some horses that are, struggling to get healthier structures or struggling to maintain soundness. And that's when, I'm still feeling like this perpetual student. I think we all are. And that's what I would love to even talk more about is, some of those cases where you're like, what, where's the missing link, and where can we sort of help these horses improve? Or is there a limit in some of these cases that they just kind of hit their potential? And is that like past pathology? Is that, their upbringing? Is it sort of, they've been down this, repetitive strain injury, journey for too long? But yeah, I would love to kind of explore some of that and see if you've seen anything similar, or if you have some, magic bullet that you've seen work for more horses than not.
Oh wow, bless you. There's no magic bullet. I think, and I think this is where we have to be very, very serious with this. You know, you know, I constantly talk about foundation, talking about sort of birth to adult weight. You know, it starts in the womb. You know, it starts a lot of it with certainly thoroughbreds or excessively inbred horses. There's an inheritance there, inherited challenges that these guys are going to be born with, but predominantly, and this is what I kind of struggle with a lot. Never go on social media. I've really weaned myself off it because you're seeing people want to do really, really well, but they're not grasping what's going on here. And for me, I mean, I can tell you all the mistakes because there's thousands of them. Do you know what I mean? But what is it that they all have in common? And the start of it is they have very underdeveloped feet.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the development of the foot, soon as they're born, these guys got to move. They have to move. And the importance of that is the internal structures of the foot, they're not formed. And people are just not grasping this importance of let's get the foundation there. So if we talk about young foals when they're born, the biggest structure is the digital cushion. It's like a wee tennis ball at the back of the foot. And you see them bouncing around. I mean, these guys elevate off the ground. Yeah. Now I've seen incredibly well developed feet in adult horses, and they move exactly the same. So why aren't they getting from that point to that point? So we can talk about exercise and we can talk about stimulus and all those sorts of things and the dynamics of growing up. But 9 times out of 10, there's not a lot of people talking about that or thinking about that. So what we end up with is the start of when the horse starts getting backed or people are wanting to do things with them. So first and foremost is the horse ready? And it's not about, you can talk about like that kind of mental well-being, but let's just go through the physical first. It's the digital cushion now starting to form the fibrostructures that are then attaching to the secondary fibrostructures that need to form off the lateral cartilages in the back of the foot. And that's brutally important because the lateral cartilages, although they're making up a good proportion of the back of the foot, the sides of it, they're also encapsulating, protecting veins leaving the foot. So now we're into the importance of circulation, that kind of stuff, And then the next part, again, people don't really think about is laminae itself. When we've looked at wild horses have way less laminae leaves than domesticated horses, but they're bigger and they're chunkier and they're way more vascular than what we see when we're, dissecting domesticated horses. So first and foremost, let's say, for example, if this development doesn't happen, if we don't get the digital cushion forming, if we don't get the lateral cartilages forming that joint and that bridge or the leaf spring that people like to talk about at the back of the foot, what else is not forming? Well, laminae is particularly weak. Is the pedal bone forming correctly? I mean, I had a light bulb moment just the other day, and it's like, oh, pedal bone has to grow in the foot. Do you know what I mean? And it's really obvious. But like, I'm 50 years old now. It's the first time I'd thought about it. You know what I mean? So with all these structures, the papillae that's forming, everything that's there to protect and encapsulate the bony column within the foot. First question is it developed? Is it developing at the right stages, moving into adult weight? And 9 times out of 10, domestication doesn't happen. Just doesn't happen, And, for viewers out there and things like that, I'm Mr. Doom and Gloom. I'll tell you how a horse will break and I'll tell you how long it's got.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because that was my job, putting shoes on to keep them moving, to keep them working. But nobody was questioning whether or not the integrity of the structures that the horse has when it hits adult weight, are they capable of supporting the mass of the horse over the top of that, And I mean, one of the easiest ways to do, pick the foot up, squeeze the frog in the digital cushion with your thumb and your forefinger. People constantly talk about collapsed heels. and they're obsessed over collapsed heels. And at no point am I going, well, have you assessed the digital cushion? Because the structures at the back of the foot have not developed. So you
Right.
can do everything you want. You can put all the fancy nonsense on. That structure's missing. And what you will also have, it's a brilliant guide because your laminae won't have developed. So your inner wall will not be thick enough and strong enough. And then what's the importance of that? Well, Mother Nature's cruel, but it's perfect in its design. Whereby if a horse has an insult of any sorts in its body, or it's excessively stressed or anything like that, it will give it a laminitic response. So every ripple in the foot, it's giving you information. But what is it doing? It's weakening the structure that's there to encapsulate the structures internally, and it's taking away that stability of holding the foot within the right posture that the bony column's needing. And again, it's like, why don't we talk about this more often? Why can't we? And I'm too old for this now, but let's start thinking more about setting up the foundation for our young horses. Because they need to have the strongest foot possible for the environments that domestication creates, which at times is incredibly challenging for them. It's not easy how we keep horses because it's not how a horse wants to live,
Right.
but that's what we've got, that. And this was always the most important part when I was going out to see a horse for the first time. When I got confident in this, was okay. How much money have you got? And like, what do you mean? I says, because it's going to cost you a lot of money. Because you're about to do stuff very, very different. And horse ownership's a fortune. I mean, hats off to all these guys. They could have some great cars or quad bikes. They didn't have horses. You know what I mean? But there's also that magic with horses that they pull you in, their energy in it, and they calm your soul. You know what I mean? There's this bloody magnet that drags you to them all the time. So okay, let's step right back from this. So let's say, for example, we're going to take shoes off a horse. People want to go barefoot with it. Okay, let's get the platform developed first before we consider this. And then let's assess the structural strength of this horse to see if it can cope with it. Because, I mean, I've had horses in my career whereby people want the lifestyle, there's maybe peer pressure on a yard and things like that. And you kind of rock up and you're a bit tired and, can you just have a look at this? And, you're on your way home and you have a look at it and you go, right, okay, I really want to take the shoes off it. Right, okay, and you'll take the shoes off it and you're just going, geez, man, I shouldn't have done this. You know what I mean? It's like, this ain't fair on the horse, And then you go back the next day and put the shoes on it. And then you get more competent and actually saying, right, okay, no, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to see what can these people provide for this horse, and let's see if what that package looks like to see if we can start this journey. Because the reality of it is most people don't want the journey to be 3 or 4 years.
Right.
You know what I mean? They want to take the shoes off and within a couple of weeks they want to be out riding it. That's the goal, But unfortunately, domestication creates underdeveloped structures. And then the other issue when you hit adult weight, what you have is you have this adaptive compensatory things that go on within the hoof capsule, side bone, for example. This is all, it is a nasty, it's horrible, but then you've got to question why it's doing it. Why is it laying down reinforcing material?
Mm-hmm.
Have a look at the foot. My biggest gripe with a lot of the times is, people take shoes off and then they carve the foot out and go, right, how are we going to shoe it? Well, actually, even when people are trimming it, they're doing this. Well, actually, the horse has just told you what it needs. Just because it says trimmer doesn't mean to say you get in there and you trim it. Do you know what I mean? You have to observe first because the horse has spent a period of time laying in material that it needs. We have to learn to interpret that.
Right.
And I'm not saying this is easy stuff to learn because I learned it the hard way, and it's like, okay, so how do we get this information to people? How do we train their perceptions of what they're observing, not what the heart wants?
Yeah.
you know, because the reality of it, more often or not, you get it wrong, the horse suffers. And
Right.
that's not right. You know what I mean? Nobody signs up for that,
Yeah.
Nobody does. I've never met anybody that signed up for that. But
Yeah.
like when I first started, you get a reputation. This is what you do. Everybody wanted to do it. And then I'd had a problem with a horse. Geez, man, I'd sit all night reading books. Like, how do I get this horse out of this? Because I didn't know. You know what I mean? And looking back on it now, geez, man, I had good clients, because it was a team effort. Okay, what's happening, Matthew? Do you know what? I don't know. I really don't know. But I'm going to go back tonight. I'm going to phone this person. I'm going to phone that person, you know? But then what you weren't realizing is that the feet are a barometer of the environmental health in which the horse lives in, you know? Very, very early on, it started becoming really, really obvious that everything around the horse, its health centered around digestive health,
Yeah.
so it's pre and probiotics, right? How much money have you got? Oh, well. Okay, I need pre and probiotics in your horse. I need a liver tonic on it. And we're going to run this for 6 weeks. And I want to see if your horse improves. You know what I mean? Let me know if you've seen a difference with your horse. You know what I mean? Because that gives you information to say, well, the horse is sick. A week on liver tonic, if the horse is bouncing around as happy as pie, you're onto something. The digestive system's struggling. Pre and probiotics, what's its poo like? All these little nuggets. This is all information leading to how healthy is this horse, because you want it to be as healthy as possible before you take the shoes off it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
It,
tell owners too, 8 weeks or even 2 to 3 cycles before I
mm,
pull shoes, because I don't do any work with metal, and I used to do quite a bit with glue on shoeing. And to be
mm,
honest, I was seeing a lot of the same sort of issues with some of the glue on setups that I was seeing in metal, that the feet just weren't improving in the way that I'd like. But
yeah, yeah,
now I'll go out and say, if an owner wants me to pull shoes, I'll say, you have to change the diet 2 to 3 cycles before I even come out to take the shoes
absolutely,
off, because
yeah,
especially if you're going into these environments where everybody else in the barn is shod, and the barn owner, the barn manager, the other owners, the other boarders, they're all looking at this horse to see what's going to happen. I don't want to have a sore horse after I pull shoes and have everybody say, well, I told you so. Like, this is, horses need shoes. So, trying to set them up for success in that way. And then
yeah, yeah,
sometimes I've
yeah,
had to tell owners, this environment the horse lives in, this barn is not conducive to having a barefoot horse.
yeah.
They're not going to be comfortable. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. You have to do a lot of education before you even pull shoes to make sure that the owner is ready and knows what it entails. And it's not always just an
Yeah.
easy journey.
And I think as well, I mean, the biggest difficulty, I mean, horses aren't difficult, it's people, it's, you know, me and Mark talked about this the other week. We were busy doing some stuff, and I'm saying, the more you understand humans and how they learn, it's like we're all in these little silos, and the silos is the environment that we're in influences our understanding from our younger years and all that kind of stuff. You're kind of pre-trained to whether or not you can problem solve or you can't problem solve, or how your emotions react and dictate to things. What's it like telling? So, can you tell somebody actually what you've done for 10 years is actually not great? You know what I mean? So there's two levels of responsibility there. One, the person delivering that message has to be careful with it, because you want to empower people. But then on the other hand, the recipient can't be defensive with it. And the biggest issue with yards and things, although anybody designed to take shoes off of horses, right? Nowadays is brilliant because they've done the work, they've done the research. You know what I mean? You're like the last little bit,
Mm-hmm.
But then they could have a whole bunch of haters on that yard. You know what I mean? People in different silos with different backgrounds and upbringings and understanding of horsemanship. That's just like, it's so alien to them. Okay, well, what's your relationship like with everybody here? You know what I mean? Because if the whole yard isn't on board with it, do you know what I mean? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a hiding sometimes, and it's very difficult because people need support with this. You know,
Right.
But then that kind of, in constant, what you're kind of talking about is, okay, are you doing this for yourself because you want to be part of a club, or are you doing this for your horse?
Yeah.
And if you want to be part of a movement and you want it, you want the badge or whatever it is, do you know what I mean? I don't even know what it is anymore, to be honest. It's like, well, if it's about you, then no, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I can't be part of this because I'm going to break you down. I'm going to make you cry at some point.
Right.
Because ultimately what you're doing is the information you're bringing to them, your experience that you're bringing to them, your knowledge fractured. You don't know everything. You can't know everything. So there's going to be gaps. Well, those gaps has to come from the horse owner understanding and knowing the horse
Yeah.
to kind of help you fill those things in. It's a team effort, The farrier traditionally would turn up, shoe the horse, and the responsibility of the foot was on the farrier because the shoe was on. The shoe come off, the farrier went on, put it on. There was a responsibility divide there. But then with barefoot's completely different. It should never really be called barefoot. I don't even know what name it should be called, but I think we need to all rethink this. It's about going, right, okay, I want my horse to be healthier.
Yeah.
But by doing this, I'm going to take this support system off it. Now, what is a horseshoe? Horseshoe does numerous things. Restricts circulation, which over time, it alters the stimulus through the foot, the proprioception, that kind of stuff. Through that, it slows down horn production, unless it's certain breeds. It has a very damaging effect to the hoof capsule. So then when you take the shoe off, what's always interesting is first 2 days, best thing you've ever done, taking your shoes off. And then, boom, because you've got better circulation moving. Mm-hmm. When you're getting that, you're getting a healing process, you're getting a response, but you're getting extra stimulus that a horse has not been prepared for. Right. There's all these things that's going on that the horse has to cope with.
Yeah.
So going down this lines, it's like, right, okay, we're going to do this, but we're going to set it up as much as possible. But ultimately what we'll have to be doing is we have to be better at assessing feet and saying, right, okay, big question is, am I just taking these shoes off because the feet are really bad and the farrier needs something to nail onto? You know what I mean? That's one side, or is it, right, okay, the horse needs protection, so I need an alternative because we can't nail it. So that's the glue-ons. And I mean, the products that's out there now are phenomenal. You know what I mean? Geez, back in my day, you had none of this stuff. The glues didn't work. You know what I mean? It just didn't, and like now it's like, I mean, even boot technology is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's such a golden time of innovation. But ultimately, does the horse want this? Can it cope with it? Let's look at the feet. There's very, very clear signs there to say whether or not you have enough integral strength within that hoof capsule that this horse can go through this transition.
Yeah. And I've talked to owners too, because I have owners that say, maybe my horse needs shoes, or I don't think my horse can ever be barefoot. And typically what I say is that, a horse that has poor feet or has hoof sensitivity, it's not because it has a deficiency of metal on the bottom of the foot. It's, there's something systemically that's likely causing this issue, or it's just like you were saying, lack of stimulation, lack of movement, lack of development. Mm-hmm. But I see that sensitivity or weakness as the first warning sign, or maybe it's, the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th warning sign. Maybe there's a bunch of others going on that people are missing of something going on in the body. And the hardest part, at least that I've noticed over the past 10 years of trying to parse out stuff in my own journey, is sometimes it can be so hard to find what is the trigger for this horse. Why is this horse not progressing in the way that all these other horses that I've worked on have? And I don't know if you've seen that, where there's either an unexpected issue or something that was harder to figure out, or if there's something that was surprising to you that you noticed affected the feet. I know you talked about gut health and movement, but has there been anything else that you've noticed that maybe is out of the box for owners that are seeing horses that are struggling barefoot?
Yeah, is your horse happy?
Oh, that's a good point.
Do you know what I mean? Is it happy? What's cortisol doing to the body?
Yeah.
you know, and I mean, again, this is about observations. You know, any level of stress in a horse creates cortisol. Cortisol's horrific for laminae. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, even going out before its field mate will cause stress. You know, we think about herd dynamics and things like that. You know, it's, you know, has a horse moved from the yard? Has a horse died? You know, you know, has it had an injury? Injuries are awful for horses because it freaks them out because they can't move,
Yeah.
or it limits that ability. You know, are they getting bullied in the field? You know, all these things. But what it falls into is the horse happy or is the horse stressed? You
Yeah.
know, and that's multitudes of things. You know, going into it, like, I mean, you know, let's go down the rabbit hole of whether the horse should be ridden.
Yeah.
If the foot isn't developed correctly, do you know, how does the horse move? Do you know what I mean? Is its muscles where they should be? Does it have the range of motion in which it needs? You know, is its spine developed correctly?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I mean, Alicia, this is the real difficult stuff with this because we're talking about creating perfection, which doesn't exist. You know, horses hurt. We go to work hurt. You know what I mean? We heal. But where you see people able to cope with it, it's because their foundation's right. Do you know what I mean? They're eating well, their diet's good, they're stretching before they do exercise, they're stretching when they finish. You know, to me now, it's like if you're going to do any level of performance work with a horse, even if it's on a very amateur level, you treat the thing like a performance horse. It's an athlete, you know. But also as well, we've got to get back to what was its foundation like. You know, how was the foundation for this horse to now have a human on its back? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if it isn't right, they're niggles. And those niggles will all contribute to the horse going, well, okay, I'll cope for a bit. Okay, I'll adapt. Okay, I'll compensate. And while they're doing all this, we're oblivious to it because these guys are masters at this. You know what I mean? I used, horses lame. All right, okay, it's at the vets. Let's go and have a look at it. And it's the compensatory limb, unless it's direct trauma, it's the compensatory limb has now given up being able to compensate. And everybody obsesses over the compensatory limb. You know what I mean? You're sat, you're looking, you're going, if you just go at the opposite end, do you know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
something not quite right there. I'm just a farrier. I don't know, but I really think we should really give it an MOT because I think this is a compensatory issue, you know? Um, and it's all that sort of stuff that, you know, you get into horses, you hang out with horses for 10 years, 15 years, whatever else, you know, your knowledge bases of learning this stuff, unless you're a PhD student, you're going to have huge gaps in your knowledge bases, you know, because we can't learn everything.
Yeah.
Which is why each yard should have a team of people that they trust just to give them MOTs every now and again. You know, do we x-ray feet every year? You know what I mean? If we did that, we'd catch way more stuff, I think, you know, because we'd have a history of what we're doing. Because when a horse fails, for example, or if we fail to be able to rehabilitate it, we then start looking at, well, what's wrong here? You know what I mean? What we're not doing is looking to see what's wrong with it before we rehabilitate it. You know,
Yeah.
otherwise, what a waste of time taking its shoes off, put it on a track system. Do you know what I mean? Well, good luck with that because it's just wandering about with its mates. You know, you know, all you're doing is creating a safe environment. You know, at the best part for it just to be a horse. You know, I mean, another question is some horses just don't want people on their backs.
Yeah.
You know, because they can't cope with it. So where does that get shown up? Gets shown up within the feet. How do we know this? Well, you know, if it's an undeveloped foot, the event lines on a foot will be really, really quite pronounced. If you worm the horse, you'll get a laminitic response, regardless of how healthy the horse is. Do you know what I mean? You'll have an event line to tell you that's what happened. Changing weather, for example, spurt of grass, certainly in the UK and things, you will have a universal event line, and all the horses in the area will have the same event line. You know, so we know they're dictated by the environment in which they live in. No different to you and I. You know, we'll
Yeah.
go to work, we'll have a bad day. We come home, we're stressed, we're this, that, and the other. Well, of course it's going to have a negative effect on our bodies.
Yeah.
So it's tricky stuff, this. But if you've got, I tell you what, I'll rewind. Okay, I'll tell you something a little bit kind of funny. The worst argument I ever had was at a yard with a 13-year-old girl because she was trying to convince me that the next evolutionary step to horses is they were going to be bone horseshoes.
Oh my goodness.
Do you know what? And do you know what? She presented it so blooming well. It was just like, do you know what? You give me a phone when you see a horse born with shoes, because I think you're onto something. It's the only way of getting out of this argument, But what was interesting was what I was trying to explain to her is one of my biggest light bulb moments was, okay, let's take evolution aside, right? Agree with it, disagree with it. What if everything in nature is perfect? What if the design of a horse is absolutely perfect? So think on what that perfection looks like, and then have a look to see where the horse has to get to achieve that, specifically in the foot, for example, because we're all just hoof nerds. We're talking about feet. So then you can start grading structures and saying, well, this needs to be straighter. This could be more concave. How thick do I want my hoof wall? Now, I know it's guesstimating sometimes, but it's a great start to say, well, this could be something better. So let's aim for that. And what you'll start finding is seasonally, these horses will be trying to achieve that. Whether it's laying sole in as a reinforcing structure, for protection or whatever. The soles are phenomenal. Soles respond way quicker than hoof capsules, the outer hoof walls do. So they're like your biggest gift. Frogs are great at it as well. So you've got this adaptation underneath the horse, but you've got to be able to interpret what it's asking for. And most often or not, people are going, well, I need to trim this foot, and this foot needs to be to these specific parameters, because that's what we've been led to believe. But what we're not doing is go, what does that limb need right now? You know what I mean? We're not assessing specific limb by limb and then assessing the horse's needs over the top of these limbs, And this is where bringing in multidisciplined people to say, right, what do you think? You'll bring a body worker in. Body work, I'll tell you all sorts of stuff that you never even thought of, because it's not your skill set, you know?
You mentioned a body worker, and we have a body worker that comes and works on the rehab horses at my farm. And I was talking to her last week or the week before about how there's one horse at my farm that has done so well. We pulled his shoes and he's like hoof comfort wise done great. But he still, for whatever reason, has slightly low angles behind. And so one of the vets that had looked at him recently had said, why don't we wedge up his hind feet? And he's barefoot right now. And he's, confidently moving across the track. He doesn't seem to care about any surfaces. He's, but he just has that weak digital cushion behind, and his angles are low no matter what we do with the trim. And I was talking to the body worker about wedging, and she was saying, she's like, I always hate when I see these horses that end up in wedges, that I can feel their upper body have so many compensation issues from trying to elevate their hoof angles. And I'm not saying that like every single time there's a hoof angle elevation that's wrong. I'm not, and she wasn't saying that either, but she was saying that, what's the goal? Like are we just, is it really that there's an upper body issue that needs to be addressed and we're trying to elevate the hoof angle, and it's really just, a Band-Aid or kind of chasing the end of the issue instead of the cause of the problem. And, but she was just saying that she's noticing all these compensations in horses who, when their hoof care changes, she can feel it in their upper body if it's something that's not working for them. But we're so focused on looking at that hoof or the distal limb in isolation sometimes and seeing, how should these angles be, or what can we do to this foot, instead of saying like, what's the body doing? And I just want to say that because I know you mentioned, the body and compensation and body workers, and it was such a great conversation that I never really considered what's the body worker feeling when we're changing the feet. So that was really cool.
So the foot's So here's the big question: is the foot the cause, or is the foot the victim?
Right.
because it can be both. you know, um, to me, low heels and things. I mean, the first thing is go at the digital cushion. Okay, palpate that digital cushion. Thoroughbreds, some of them have limited, if no level of digital cushion whatsoever. Like it's been bred out of them. You know, some horses, and this is the thing with digital cushions. A lot of people get excited. Oh, the digital cushion's bulked up. Blah 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 blah. Digital cushion's compensating. In adult horses, you do not get development of digital cushions. You get the structures that were there for when they were little actually start re-engaging, and they'll firm up and they'll toughen up. But it's a compromised structure.
Yeah.
Now what's great about that is straight away what you've got stability through the extension and the landing, which is fantastic. If you don't have that, what's it landing onto? We haven't even talked about breakover, for example, which affects greatly how a horse will carry and track through and stuff. So it's, again, get back. Do we have structure there that nature intended, or do we have something that's compromised? Because if it's compromised, you'll start seeing in the movement of the horse, and the biggest challenge with that is you absolutely have to work with a body worker to understand what's going on, even if they're just telling you what muscles are tight.
Yeah.
And stuff. We have this obsession straight away. Oh, well, we need to jack the foot up. Well, yeah, good for you. But for how long?
Right.
Like how long? Like what is the end goal? Because sometimes if you've got underdeveloped structure, you stick a wedge in there with a horseshoe. What you'll do is you'll sacrifice those heels. Because if the digital cushion's underdeveloped, the structure's underdeveloped, your laminae, which produces your hoof capsule, which your bars and your heels and things, they won't be strong enough for that. And over time, they will collapse because you're creating a leverage force on it that actually will just drive them up into the hoof capsule and then drive them forward. So it's a short-term gain. And this is where I'm kind of quite privileged now, because you can go through pros and cons and things, and it's not real world thinking. But for me, is the horse was never set up properly, so it's never going to be a performance horse. It's going to be, so we start assessing based on what the horse is able to do, not what we think it should do.
Yeah.
So it becomes more horse centric. Some horses shouldn't have riders on them.
Yeah.
They're not strong enough. They're just not strong enough. And that's a tough conversation to have with somebody, especially if they've just purchased it.
Right.
And I've been in those situations. And you've got a wee kiddie, she's doing really well at Pony Club, and they've gone to the next level, and they've bought this thoroughbred cross, whatever, and they're all excited, and they've paid a lot of money, and you're like, oh, no, what have you done? Right, Matthew, what can you do with the feet? The feet aren't great. It's on the vet report. And you lift it up and you bite your tongue. You go, this is an undeveloped foot. And this lassie wants to wally and chase around the field with her mates and just have fun that all teenagers want to, So the next question is, how much money have you got? Because we're going to have to work hard at stabilizing this and looking after it. So now you've got an ethical issue whereby it's like, okay, as a farrier, I can make any horse move. I can make a lame horse move. But the question is, should we do that?
Yeah.
And that's where I'm not saying we need to have that conversation, but when we take shoes off our horses, what we end up being exposed to is a whole heap of things that horse has been carrying, because the foot is an environmental and a health barometer of where it's at. So if you go to Mother Nature again, you've got a big, huge herd dynamic. You've got all that sort of posturing going on and things. Okay. So in the wild, if you want to, if you take pigs and other animals and things, even if the dominant animal's sick, or if it's really sick, they'll kill it and get rid of it. You know what I mean? Because they don't want that disease within that herd group. What do we do with horses? Well, this is just my theory, we take them out of the feet and it slows them down, and something comes along and eats it. Disease control. And this is why our feet are so vulnerable to so much stuff. So very, very healthy, well-structured, developed hoof capsules can cope with laminitic events. You can worm it, and it's poorly for a few days, a little bit footy. It will get over it, but it's got the foundation there for it to cope with that. It's not ideal, but if you've got a very underdeveloped foot, it's absolutely catastrophic for it.
Right.
And then you've got a period of time, depending on, you've got it getting through the sickness of the poisoning it's just had. Then you've got, the stabilization, then the healing process, and then they're starting to grow out a new hoof capsule because it's just ruptured the one it's had. And this is the challenge that we find ourselves in, where we have very adverse seasonal environments, certainly in Europe and the UK and places like that, whereby once you lose that hoof capsule, you got to grow a new one. So the more underdeveloped that foot is, the more difficult that is for that horse to cope and deal with that.
Right.
If it's a well-developed foot, it can shrug it off and get over it within a few weeks. I'm speaking general here as well. Every horse is different, but they'll get over it. And then we don't talk about, let's say, the observation you're talking about heels there for a second. When the horse goes to sleep at night, because we all like to put them in places and all the rest of it, how much stability and support is the bedding that the horse has? Because the horse, to stand correctly, needs to elevate the back of its heels. We don't talk about that. Robert Bowker did immense work on that with pea gravel and x-raying horses. Even down looking at venograms and things like that. So, but also as well, when you get into sort of like my biggest eye opener was a guy called James Shaw, Tai Chi instructor and stuff.
Oh yeah, he came and did a conference with us.
Great guy. Absolutely. I mean, the first time I met him, he picked my ass up and go, "Well, it's a great weapon." And I'm like, but like, we're not meant to be talking about horses. And we didn't even do anything on horses. We talked about people first, and he proved through the work that he did with the group I was with how poor our posture was. But then taking the bony columns of your body, being able to stand in a certain way, how then gravity will transfer through the bony column and allowing all your muscles and your bits and bobs for to relax. Nobody talks about horses doing that. Horses do that when they go to sleep and stump their toes in the ground, or they're stood at rest. So the stay apparatus gets a break because gravity, that subtle little weight that's been put on them, they're masters of the art of being able to get themselves in a position where they can use that for effective movement and also for at rest. And the circulatory system works really well with that because it's designed when they're fixed in these positions for it to work without the horse having to move. We talk about lymphatics, for example, in horse. Well, nobody talks about lymphatics, but it's like 2,000 lymph nodes in a horse. So, like, how does it work? Well, actually, the horse has to move for that filtration system to work. It's not like human biology, So, okay, so what happens when it's stood still? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, actually, the circulation system has to be effective because the lymphatic vessels are all wrapped around arteries and things like that. So it's, and I didn't know any of this. I was never taught this stuff, but privileged throughout my career to bump into these guys and they give you these little nuggets and it's like, oh, well, this makes sense, or this makes sense. And I'm not saying you have the full picture, but you're slowly oh, well, that's why the horse does that. I wonder if it's this, So now when we think about what sort of ground are the horses on, you know what I mean? Well, we're not thinking about what a horse needs,
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important to, talk to, learn from, go shadow, go take clinics with as many different people as possible. And why I so much dislike programs or methodologies that have sort of like one guru and one expert, because like you're saying, you learn from so many different people who might not even be as focused on the hoof, but they're giving you information about other parts of the body that are affecting the hooves. And it's, you sort of throughout your career, piece it together, and that's where you get your perspective and your experience and your ability to help horses. And it's, everybody has their own journey and their own little bit that they're contributing to this, but it's so valuable to learn from other people's experience and just see what what other people have learned from the horses in their life. And that's why I also love talking to you guys. And even, I'm hoping to, well, I am going back out to the UK in October, and I'm hoping to catch up and shadow some people while I'm out there, just to continue just seeing what other people are seeing and learning, because I still feel like I have so much to learn. There's just never ending information that's not, it's just, we have to continually be a student of the horse in that way.
It's an interesting thing, is that these gurus, right? And there's thousands of them now. You know what I mean? And oh man, I just feel sorry for everybody, because the message is, if you do it like this, your horse will be better.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's the biggest fabrication and lie that's out there. That's there to sell a course.
Right.
What they need to start be talking about. This is how I do it in the environment that I'm in with these horses, and I get some positive results.
Right.
That's more authentic. Because like going to a desert in America, taking desert horses and trimming them, and then coming back and replicating in the UK, you'll cripple them.
Yes.
You'll cripple the horses. And it's happened, and it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And the folk are scratching their head and things, and it's like, and again, through the best will, everybody seems to think that I can trim a horse's foot better. Do you know what I mean? The word trim's wrong. By removing something, you can remove excessive material, but be careful when you start removing what the horse wants, because you've not observed what that function is.
Yeah.
And there's too much of this. There's too much of removing going on, I mean, my biggest bugbear, and oh man, my pals just laugh at me now, this obsession with trimming the frog like an upside down boat.
Yeah.
If you look at the frog before you trimmed it, it wasn't that shape. So why have you just created that shape?
Right.
One of the greatest things I learned when I went to America, Paige Poss, she taught me in a way to basically observe things and problem solve very, very differently, in a way that my brain would have never gotten to in the whole time of my entire lifetime. And this is the challenge and the difficulty when you're on a learning trajectory, that actually you're only retaining and taking in information based on, a lot of the time subconsciously, what you want to believe. And to have that openness to say, right, okay, I'm not going to have an opinion on this. I'm going to observe. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to do it different. Or I'm going to go back to the drawing board. And it's these little micro steps that we'll have to do. But, everybody's obsessed with feet. Do you know what I mean? Like, be obsessed about the horse from when it's in the womb, be obsessed, because when it's, if it's mum sick, the foal will be born sick. You know what I mean? So, that some of them get born the laminitic. And it's like, oh, well, where did that happen? Well, because the poor mum had laminitis in amongst all that. Whether it was wormed or not wormed, or, as a classic example, there's multiple examples out there. That's now just put that poor guy at a disadvantage in his life, because the foundation's so important, And again, there's no such thing as perfection, and we'll never, ever get it right. But as a collective of people caring for horses, we got to start universally talking about, right, okay, worming's the horrific problem that's out there, specifically in the UK now, because we're just poisoning my fields now. Do you know what I mean? This is like the next big, big, big problem that's coming up. Nobody's taking it serious, Well, good luck taking the shoes off your horse, because it won't be sound. You know what I mean? Not because the structure's not working well, because it's constantly got a toxic insult, and its bacterial system is not recovering because the soil's dead, and it's not able to get that bacteria into its digestive system. That's your foundation. People talk about, my favorite was always, what do you feed your horse? They'll go into great detail. It was always a trick question, great detail about what was in the bucket. It says, come on, let's go into the field, let's see what your horse eats. Because that's supplements. Do you know what I mean? That's just a base feed. That isn't what your horse eats, because it hangs out there for 12, 14 hours. Yeah. Let's go and talk about what it eats out there. Because because that has a greater impact on the horse than at times what we're putting in my buckets.
Oh, absolutely. I was just going to say, I mean, that's sort of, I have horses at my farm, the ones that aren't metabolic, that rotationally graze. And when I got the farm, the fields were like this beautiful monoculture of Timothy grass, basically. And now I'm wanting to incorporate biodiversity in the forage and have more of a difference of grasses and plant life, so that their gut is not just used to one type of grass. And it's really, I feel like everything's a rabbit hole.
Well, it is, but I mean, what you're now going to be is you're going to be a phenomenal ecologist in the next 3 years, because you're going to soil test, you're going to work out how much what your mineral balance is based on your mineral balance. What's the pH of the soil? You know what I mean? Do I need to lime it first?
Yeah.
Because the meadow seeds will not grow in an acidic environment. You know what I mean? So then you have to, again, it's all about foundation. How healthy is the soil? What do I have to do to my soil first before I start putting seed down? Otherwise, you're just going to waste your money, And it's, I didn't know this until I met an ecologist. You know what I mean? Oh my gosh, there's more answers to X, Y, Z. And this is why, certainly in my practices, I was seeing groups of horses with the similar issues in similar areas. And then when you pull the soil maps out, which are readily available, you're going, flipping out. These things are following these contours, in these areas. Very acidic ground, very alkaline ground. Do you know what I mean? Even down to how much aluminium's in the soil. Because like your aluminium's a huge problem, because if it's really wet, it's absorbed. Well, what damages lymphatics? Excessive aluminium buildup in the lymph nodes. So is it able to remove regenerative cells? All these sorts of things. And I know we can go down these rabbit holes and we can get into the absolute minutiae of the perfect health horse. You know what I mean? But ultimately, it's just about saying to the horse, okay, are you capable of doing what I'm asking you to do? And if not, let's see what you're capable of doing, and let's work around that. And that's the same principles with horses' feet. Once they hit adult weight, I don't believe structures develop. I believe that they compensate.
Yeah.
And that compensatory type of thing that happens, some horses are able to do it and some don't. So they stay in this equilibrium of, this is just what I've got as my foundation. And then, like I say, is the foot the victim or is it the cause? Well, sometimes it's both. So the importance of the conversations with the body workers and things, is brutally important, because if the chest's underdeveloped, you know what I mean, horse is not going to track through correctly, do you know what I mean? Or it's going to be lopsided. That will have an effect on foot landing. So all these things, and then the horse will start twisting slightly because it needs to support one corner rather than the other, Then you put a poor rider on it, like exacerbate that problem, And it's, I mean, and this is my problem. I'm a jack of all trades, absolute master of nothing now, because I've had all these little these little tiny bits of information that's been pulled together, but predominantly it's been pulled together to try and see if we can improve one horse, which is the importance of having as many professionals that you trust, that are open to suggestion, but more importantly, that are more than happy to turn around and say, do you know what, I don't know. I'm not sure about this, So the farrier, I wrote to 2 farriers, and one farrier didn't reply back to us. When I was doing my training and things, he was horrific. He was on me all the time. Turned up at a yard more often than not. He'd have me in tears when I left. He was so tough on us, driving you. And I just felt it was bullying, if I was honest, And then I think it was the week before I was moving away, he drove 60 miles out of his area and rocked up on my yard, and he pulled up, and I'm like, oh, geez, not this guy. Yeah, and hi, how are you doing? The boss is up the house if you want to go and get it. And I was busy sorting racking shoes in the back of the van and getting ready for the next day and stuff. He goes, no, he says, I'm here to see you. And he got out, he shook my hand, and he says, Matthew, I've only one piece of advice for you. He says, please remember that you can't fix them all.
Yeah.
And it just blew me up. This is the best advice I've ever had. you know. And then the bugger drove away, and I just sat in freaking tears at the back of this van, just sobbing, because it's like, geez, man, you were helping me, and I misinterpreted the way you were kind of doing that, you know. And this is the challenge. The horses aren't the issue. More often than not, it's about having the safe conversations with people. And the challenge with that sometimes is people don't want to hear what you got to say.
Yeah.
You know, right? This is a checklist of all the things that aren't right. Potentially we can improve this. This needs to be looked at, and these bits, we need somebody else to come and have a look at it. And it becomes a learning journey. When I used to do a lot of, when I used to teach people trimming, it got to the point where, like, first session, you sit them all down and everybody's, you know, doing the whole form and trying to be friends and all the rest of it. And I say, right, before we start, hands up, who's here to fix a horse? Who's here to fix your horse? And more often than not, they'll put a hand up. I'm saying, right, okay, I can't have you thinking about that horse, because everything I'm going to tell you, you're going to relate it to that horse. And I says, let's look at it a different way. The horse that's poorly is going to teach you to be able to help other horses. And let's have that mindset going forward, whereby we need to incorporate as much different angles as possible. Because sometimes we get so focused down a line of this one horse, what we're not able to do is actually assess it without emotion, to go through the whole principles of, should we be doing this? I.e., should we take shoes off it? You know, because maybe where it's at is where it'll be fine. I've shod horses for years. I've shod horses in their 30s with good feet. And these horses weren't necessarily adversely affected by horseshoes. But what they had was very good feet, and they had periods of time of rest, which was really important, you know?
Yeah.
But then when we have a very underdeveloped feet, regardless of the shoes being on, the shoes being off, these guys had the same compromised issues and challenges, you know? The challenge with Barefoot is it drags you in saying you can fix this. You know, well, first things, how dare you say that? Because that's not fair on the owner, and that's certainly not fair on the horse. Because you've got to assess it to say, can this horse cope with this? What I'm about to do, can it cope with it? And if this is the path that we're all agreed that we're going to go down, before we take that bullet, let's get the foundation right. Let's restore the stomach. Let's see all the challenges. Let's put it on a list, and let's tick off as many before the shoes come off. You know, or even better, find a horse that's never had shoes on. I mean, they're easy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, because they'll tell you. You know what I mean? Because
Right.
these guys have always had that sensory perception, because they've never had that thing taken away from them. You know,
Yeah.
that sensory perception taken away. You know. So,
Right. Yeah.
sorry,
And
I've kind of rabbiting. I'm a little
no,
bit soapboxing, but
no,
I
that's
don't want
great.
to.
I feel like we could talk about this kind of stuff forever, because really there's so many things that affect hooves, and just, I mean, even just the things we're talking about in terms of horses feeling safe and feeling happy and cortisol levels and everything. There's just so much to dive into. And I know that we'll be chatting again next week. I think I'm so excited to talk more about, you know, I mean, I think that'll be a different topic, which, you know, we'll kind of dive into in the group chat in a second. But yeah, I think that, you know, this is such a great conversation. It's something that really is never ending in terms of being that perpetual student and constantly learning from different horses and different people and different perspectives. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about that. And I know that we'll talk more about that next week. And I'm really excited for that too.
Alicia, it's always a pleasure. So,
Yeah.
And I like talking about this kind of sort of stuff, because I think it's a way. What we have to do is we have to break barriers down, and we have to have honest conversations. Certainly in a world now where the internet is driving agendas, and it's driving, like you say, it creates gurus, and it's, you know, anybody that wants to be a guru shouldn't be learned from. You know, people that avoid that and just want to be a student, but I want to share with what I know, and I want to give you that so you go and explore more and learn more than me. They're the people we need to hear about more. You know, these are the guys and girls we need to get into rooms and let's talk about what we don't know. And that becomes a different conversation, because people will then go out and seek those answers, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
Hey-ho.
Well, again, thank you so much. And
Take care. Be good. Bye.
yeah, have a good rest of your night.
Yeah. No worries. See you later. Bye. Bye.
Bye. I always say that I'm slightly more hoof obsessed than the average person, and chances are, if you're listening to a hoof care podcast, you are too. So we should probably be friends. Feel free to find me on Facebook or email me at thehumblehoof@gmail.com.